Well, good evening everyone and welcome to this IIBA UK chapter webinar. My name's Adrian Reid and I'm the IIBA UK chapter president, and we're really fortunate today to be joined by Debra Paul, who's going to be speaking to us about business analysis, the third wave. Now, I'm sure for many of you, Debbie won't require an introduction. I'm sure many of you have read some of her books or met her at one of the many business analysis events in the UK. But Debbie is the Managing Director of AssistKD, one of the UK's leading BA training companies, and is also a Chief Examiner for BCS, as well as being an author of a range of books about and around business analysis. So shortly I'll be handing over to Debbie to run the presentation this evening, but just a reminder to everyone dialed in, you should see a chat window, a question window, and if you do have any questions throughout the webinar, please do feel free to type them in. We'll have a question and answer session at the end, and Debbie will be able to answer any of the questions that you have. So Debbie, thank you very much for joining us, and over to you.
Thanks very much, Adrian. Well, thank you very much also for asking me to do this. As you know, I've been involved with business analysis a long time, and thinking about how it's developed and how it's developing for the future is something that I do quite often. And when I was asked to think about this and to do a presentation on the subject, the concept of a wave came to me and it began to form in my mind. The reason for that was we often hear about things like the fifth wave of computing, or for all sorts of things, the latest new wave. And I thought, actually, if I think back over the 25 years or so that business analysis has been around, I can see a couple of waves of business analysis work. And I quite liked the idea of a wave for what it represented, because I feel that it brings to mind aspects like a build-up of energy and a momentum that is a bit unstoppable. And when I think back over what business analysts have done, that's exactly how it seems to me. They've gained experience, they've come together in communities, and those communities where people have talked to each other and discussed issues have led to this build-up of energy and momentum that has moved business analysis forward in a very clear direction. And that's what I could see having happened, having looked at lots of different organizations and thousands of business analysts that I've talked to over the years. In my experience, business analysts are never ever keen to stand still. They always want to keep on developing and moving forward and bringing the benefits to their organization from the work that they do. And I think the concept of a wave really captures that, which is why this talk is called Business Analysis, the Third Wave. Before I look at exactly what I mean by that, I thought that we might actually look at some tangible numbers, some interesting figures actually about business analysis. And the figures on the screen look at business analysis from a number of different levels. So first of all, if we think about the individual level, some of these numbers give us an idea of just how many people are employed as business analysts. So for example, right in the center of the screen, it tells us that one of the largest companies in the UK employs almost 3,000 business analysts. And that's a huge number for an organization, and I think demonstrates a genuine belief and investment in employing a capability that can really help in the business world. Similarly, I found some numbers about IT business analysts working across the US. CNN Money tells me approximately 130,000. And of course, there are probably business analysts based in the business functions to add into that number. So it may be that you can double it to get to the total number of business analysts working in the US. I also found a number for BAs employed in Canada, 170,000. These are huge numbers, and it just goes to show how important business analysis is across the world, that so many organizations are investing in it and employing BAs. And looking at the organizational level, you'll also see that it says there that the BA Manager Forum, which is for heads of BA practice, has over 150 organizations involved with it, and that is primarily in the UK. And then if we think of the different countries, we can see that the BA Conference Europe was attended by representatives from 24 countries last year. So I think what these numbers sum up for us is that we have a formidable community that has developed over the last 2 decades. Looking back to where business analysis started then, the initial wave was characterized very much by having a focus on what we called then bridging. And what that meant was that it bridged the business and the IT communities. And it was felt that this was needed in order to translate the language, the jargon, the business terminology, the IT terminology, and make sure that the two groups of people could work together effectively. Now, in these days, the role was very much a project role with a specific focus on defining the requirements for the IT solution. And this is where it started. So it's about making sure that the business needs and the software solution were in accord. I think the work in the bridging area is still absolutely core to business analysis. So what I'm not saying with the idea of different waves is that everybody has moved on to a new wave. It's that the actual role and the discipline of business analysis has grown and developed. So the first wave of bridging is still absolutely vital, and we still need to have people working on projects, making sure that they understand what the business staff are asking for, making sure that they're thinking about, well, what's the impact of that? Have I elicited all of the information? All that type of thing. And ensuring that the communication works effectively with the people putting the solution together. And I think this is still vital for projects to be successful. However, business analysts, as I said, they do have a tendency of wanting to move forward, to develop, to really add value. And what happened after about 10 years maybe, was there a lot of business analysts came into the community, the discipline really started to grow, and some of the business analysts actually came in from the business. And a lot of BAs were working on projects and asking a few questions about whether they were actually doing what was really going to address the business needs. And a lot of the people I spoke to around by this time expressed a lot of frustration. One of my absolutely favourite management writers is Peter Drucker. And I love this quote because to me it encapsulates something that we always need to think about. So when he says about management doing things right and leadership doing the right things, I think, yes, that's what business analysis is about. It's about doing the right things. And maybe sometimes in the first wave on projects, we got caught up in situations where maybe the solution was thought about a bit too early, maybe the analysis wasn't done sufficiently in order to decide what the solution might be, and we end up defining requirements well, but not necessarily doing the things that are really needed. And just to look at a very similar quote that I think also is very effective, is this one by Stephen Covey from the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People book, where he talks about leadership determining whether the ladder is leaning against the right wall. And I think around by this time, this is what BAs wanted. They wanted to make sure the ladder was leaning against the right wall and they were supporting their organization in doing the right things. So the second wave of business analysis came about, and this was because we had a lot of very experienced BAs, and these experienced BAs were saying, I can offer more. It's not enough to define requirements for a solution where I feel the early analysis hasn't been done to make sure the solution's correct or the one that will deliver what the business requires us to. The BAs were saying we need to work at a pre-project level, an early engagement point, whereby we initially start off by saying, what problem are we trying to solve here? Where we look at root causes, where we think about all of the different aspects. You know, is this a problem that needs a technical solution? Or is this a problem that actually could be addressed in a number of different ways? Maybe the process could be streamlined a little and that would give a very effective outcome. So what this second wave, which I've called challenging, is about, is actually about not accepting that the solution that's been pre-identified is necessary, but taking it back to what's the problem, what's the root causes, how do we look at this from a problem-solving perspective, and what do we do to meet the needs of the business before we start moving forward onto a project. One of the things I sometimes say about business analysis is we don't set strategy, that's not part of our role usually. But what we are involved with is strategy execution. So in this early engagement phase, we need to know what is it that this organization is trying to achieve here in order to make sure that we really can do the best job that we can as analysts. And by that I mean as people who are thinking about situations and not accepting ideas blindly. So the second wave was quite a dramatic move, I think, for business analysis, and it came about because of a lot of BAs saying that they felt they could move into an area where they could be of more value to their organizations. That actually understanding at a pre-project level what really needed to happen meant that you were more likely to get solutions that were doing the right things. However, as I said, business analysts are nothing if they're not ambitious, driven, keen to develop, moving forward. So this wave now started to move, and recently I've perceived a third wave of business analysis, which is where I came in with this talk. Some business analysts are now working at a very senior level. Some people have been business analysts for many, many years, and they have a great deal of knowledge about their organization, and they have a great deal of skill in actually conducting business analysis work. And now, at a senior level, they're not looking just at a pre-project piece of work. They're taking a more portfolio look. So they're looking across the organization using techniques like value stream analysis to actually look at how value is delivered for the organization. They're thinking about, well, if we've got this portfolio of analysis projects, where's the priority? Where should we be putting the effort? And how should we be doing it? They recognize that one size does not fit all. And so for a particular situation, for a particular context, there may be a number of different ways to actually address what they're trying to do in the business analysis work, and they can therefore set the approach. I think one of the really useful things that can also be done here is actually looking at where the best return on the investment will come from for the organization. And sometimes that could be through not doing something or through putting the priority somewhere else. Ultimately, as we are just hopefully coming out of one of the deepest recessions in many of our lifetimes, we have organisations that don't have money just to spend unwisely. And one of the things about this advisory business analysis role is that it can start thinking about how do we support organisations in investing wisely. If we look at the portfolio and we look at the priorities, what are we going to do to make sure that we do the analysis projects that really will deliver value and get the desired outcomes for the organisation? So this has taken business analysis up to another level, where, as I said earlier, business analysts are now not working on a project or a pre-project, but across the organisation, looking at value streams and really advising organisations on the best way to spend their money. And I think that this is really exciting, and I think it's really important, because you still get so many reports of projects that have failed or have been challenged because they didn't quite meet the requirements, or they went over time. And sometimes, as I'm sure many of you are aware, sometimes the investment that has been wasted is an extremely large amount. And business analysis, to me, is the discipline that can really make a difference and can really look at how can we help our organisations spend money wisely. So this is, to me, what the third wave is about. But on thinking about this, I thought, okay, well, how can we move a bit more to this third wave? Because it's certainly not universal. It really does depend on the organisational context a lot of the time. And I suspect that the majority of organisations are still maybe not quite seeing the BAs at that level. So when I was thinking about this, I thought, well, one way of actually considering it is to use one of our standard techniques, which is a SWOT analysis. So I looked at doing a high-level SWOT for business analysis. And if you think about it, if you look at strengths, business analysis is one of those roles where we've long acknowledged that the toolkit is in 3 different areas. So while we have a professional toolkit with lots and lots of tools and techniques that we can use to apply to different situations, we've also had to have a personal toolkit. The interpersonal skills of communication and facilitation and negotiation and all those sorts of things that enable us to work effectively with people from all sorts of different parts of the organisation, and often with all sorts of different views and perspectives. But then there's the third area. Because we're in this role where we're trying to translate business into IT requirements, where we're challenging conventional wisdom or suggestions and ideas to make sure they're really addressing business problems, or where we're advising at a much higher level, we've had to have business knowledge and experience. We have to have an understanding of the business domain and the organisation. So in terms of strengths, business analysts have an incredibly extensive toolkit in these 3 areas. And when you think about it, that really could add value to an organisation. Looking at opportunities, as I said, we've had this very deep recession. We are in a global competitive world. All sorts of organisations, whether in the commercial sector or a non-profit sector or government, have to compete for resources and also have to keep moving forward. So if they're constantly having to look at how do we change and improve, and we have all that rounded skill set, then obviously there are opportunities for BAs to really contribute and make a difference. And I think they are everywhere. However, quite often business analysts say to me that they don't feel they get recognition, that they have to fight for recognition in their organizations. And we get into this vicious circle where the lack of recognition seems to manifest itself then in a lack of confidence. And this can be a weakness, because if the BAs aren't feeling recognized or confident to actually really make their mark on what should be done, then actually all of those skills maybe aren't quite as effective as they might be. And sometimes those weaknesses manifest themselves in the threats that I want to identify here. Now on the slide, that looks like a truck, but in fact it is a bandwagon. Google Images promised me it's a bandwagon. And what that's trying to demonstrate is a syndrome that one of my colleagues calls chasing after shiny toys. And what we quite often talk about is the fact that because sometimes business analysts maybe feel less confident, less recognized, they run towards particular approaches or the latest thinking without stopping to actually ask the question, does this apply here? And not really trusting themselves and having confidence in their ability to use their toolkit. And I think sometimes this is where a lot of the threats are coming from to stop business analysis from moving forward, because particular roles become very, very prevalent in the organization. And we sometimes don't challenge that, and we don't stand up and say, actually, business analysis could really help in that situation if we use this particular approach and if we were recognized and given some authority to actually apply it. So in terms of the SWOT, I think there's a lot of opportunity, but I do think we do need to be very, very careful about some of these threats. We have got a fantastic skill set, and actually we need to trust ourselves that we're great and we've got these great skills in order to give ourselves the confidence to gain the recognition. So basically, to me, the value proposition for business analysis can be looked at in these three areas. First of all, the people. As I said earlier, I've met thousands of business analysts, and I think you'd have to go a long way before you could meet a more committed and dedicated community of people. Everybody I meet, they love being a business analyst. They really take pride in having excellent skills and in constantly developing them. They're interested in new techniques that come out and in thinking, well, how can I make this work in different situations? And that makes them adaptable. They're adaptable and flexible to what the situation needs. In terms of the overall process we apply, we don't apply a process blindly. We ask questions, what's right here? We look at our toolkit and we say, okay, which parts of this toolkit are relevant? And that allows us to develop a customizable approach that fits the particular situation, and to work in a different situation then in a different way if necessary. So that ultimately, the value proposition for business analysis is about offering a service that is relevant. One of the words that I think we made up in the business analysis community is the term solutionizing. And I don't think I've met a business analyst yet who thinks that solutionizing is a good thing. Because what we want to do is offer something that's actually relevant, and we recognize that jumping to solutions early often means that what is delivered is not relevant. And coming back to what I said about the advisory role, if it's not a relevant solution, that is a waste of investment. And while resources are tight, and we have to be very, very careful about expenditure, that is a great shame, because that can mean that something that is relevant has not been looked into and has not been delivered. So what our service is about is trying to offer something that is valuable. And this delivery of value, I think, is very, very important. We don't do business analysis just for the sake of drawing a few diagrams or analysing a few problems. We do it because ultimately, looking at the horizon, our organisation needs us to deliver information for them, solutions for them, meeting business needs, so that we will end up with something that is valuable for the organisation and for their customers. And I see that as our value proposition. So just to summarise a few key points to me. Firstly, you might have gathered that I think context is king. I'm a real believer in developing as great a skill set as you can, so that as a different situation arises, you can look at the context and you can think about what needs to be done in a very considered way and with a backdrop of skill that will enable you to do something about it. I also believe in focusing on delivering value. I think sometimes in some roles, people get very hooked into the bit that they do and forget to look at where we're trying to go. So the delivery of value is all about direction and focusing outwards to see where we're going and making sure we get there. And finally, back to that great man, Peter Drucker, we should be thinking about doing the right things. If the third wave of business analysis is about anything, it is really enabling organisations to do the right things, to invest their money wisely, and to make informed decisions. And I think business analysis as a discipline really has so much about it to offer in order to achieve these things. And for the future, I think it is going to be one of the most vital disciplines you can have in an organisation. And I think organisations that recognise that are going to do very, very well. And that, to me, is what the third wave of business analysis is about. It's all of these key messages, and it's business analysts making sure that they're operating in an advisory way to help their organisations really achieve. Okay, Adrian, back to you.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Debbie. And as a reminder for those dialed into the webinar, you can ask questions. If you type your question into the question and chat box, then we'll answer as many questions as we can until the webinar ends at around or just before 7:30. And I can see we've got a few questions coming in now. So, Debbie, our first question comes from Kunmi. I hope I'm pronouncing your name right, Kunmi. And the question is, I've read that BAs are seen as internal consultants. Could you explain how the role differs from that of the management consultant?
Yes, I can, and that's a great question, Kunmi. A management consultant usually operates at a senior executive level and quite often are involved in development of strategy. So a management consultant helps, if you like, the senior executives manage and develop the organisation. The internal consultant concept actually comes about because, and I don't think it just applies to business analysts, incidentally, but if you've got an internal role that is highly expert in a particular aspect, then what they do is they provide expertise in that aspect to the internal business functions. So just to give you another example, I believe that HR experts operate as internal consultants in their particular area. So I believe that business analysts do that. I think sometimes you might go to functions like procurement and say that they operate as internal consultants for their particular specialist area. So with regard to the business analyst, we're not advising on managing the company. So we're not management consultants. We don't advise on setting strategy. But if there is a strategy, if there is a sense of what the organisation is trying to achieve and the management are trying to do, then somebody has to look at putting the tactics in place. And quite often that gets devolved to lower level managers. And in terms of changing the organisation, this is where the business analyst comes in, to make sure that any improvements or changes are thought through and delivered effectively. So I hope that makes that clear from my perspective anyway.
Excellent, definitely. Thank you very much for that, Debbie. We've got quite a few questions coming in, so we will get through as many of them as we can. Okay, so the next question comes from Nick. And Nick says that one of the great things about the development of the profession in recent years is the acceptance that a BA's skills are valuable and transferable without needing any domain expertise. In fact, domain expertise can sometimes be seen as a negative. Your third wave thinking seems to be wanting to put that into reverse. What are your thoughts on that, Debbie?
I think that if you're going to operate as a business analyst, you need to understand business. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean commercial business. It can mean different types of organisations like charities or whatever. But I do think that you have to understand business, because if you are going to help organisations to invest wisely, say, you've got to understand a bit about how finance works. So I think on a general note, business analysts have to understand something about business and how some of the basic principles of business work. In terms of business domain knowledge, that's a very interesting question, because I think it is useful to have domain knowledge if you're going to work as a business analyst, really taking things to the third wave level, because you will be much more aware of the jargon, the terminology, the key concepts, the key values, the key legislation, that type of thing. But you know, sometimes there is a case for a domain expert where the domain is cutting across, if you like. And so in that context, you could see something like, if you like, business analysis being domain in its own right. Because sometimes, and I've seen this in some organizations, they do have people working with them who understand the actual business a lot, but they're not necessarily experts in the techniques and approaches of business analysis. And I think then, you know, that could cut across, because that really could add in another angle that could be beneficial. But I have to admit that I do think business expertise is non-negotiable. And as you get to the advisory level, you have to have some of it, because otherwise you're not going to be able to have the discussions that you need to have.
Excellent, thank you. Thank you. Which leads us on to, very neatly, to our next question. A question raised by Becky. And Becky observes that the advisory role is often played by program managers who have little interest in business analysis in the business context. How do we go about promoting the third wave and change perceptions?
Oh, Becky, that is such a great question. Yes, in my experience, it's sometimes program managers, and I think it's quite a shame, because if somebody is a program manager, as I'm sure you're aware, it is a very different skill set to somebody who's a very senior business analyst. How do we go about promoting and gaining recognition? Well, I think it's an ongoing journey, and I'm sorry to use the word journey, but I think it is. I think that in some places, some BAs are breaking through, and there is some fantastic work going on, and they have been able to convince in their organizations that analysis needs to be done by an analyst. But it has taken a very long time, and usually it has needed some form of champion. So for example, if there's a head of practice or the head of information management or whatever the division's called, who really understands business analysis, then you can get that champion moving it forward, and that really helps. But I think in a lot of situations, we're still on the route towards it in some organisations, and that route could take quite a long time. But there are things that we're doing, and I think we need to all maybe do more of this. So, for example, up until 5 years ago, 5.5 years ago, we didn't have a conference anywhere in the world dedicated just to business analysis, and we started that in the UK. And so that was a fantastic forum for bringing people together so they could start to share ideas a lot more. So we've got that type of thing, and obviously there's the BBC conference in the US as well now, and so more and more people are starting to see and hear about business analysis. So I think that's one aspect that is going on. I think also, obviously, we have professional bodies like IIBA that are trying to get the message out there. And I think IIBA and BCS, who are the other professional body, I'd like to see them talking to employing organisations a lot more. And I think what we can do as members is push them to do that. Because I think a lot of the movement in business analysis has come from this wave coming from the ground. And so, yes, it can be up to the individuals to really do a great job in their organisations and to influence and to gain recognition individually. Yes, it can be up to champions to take it forward, up to the community to have these events, forums, conferences, whereby we get more and more publicity about business analysis. But also, we need the professional bodies to step up as well on this. And I know in the UK, IIBA are doing a fantastic job at taking business analysis forums right around the country. And hopefully that is happening in chapters all around the world, because it is only by constantly getting the message out there we'll start to get the recognition that we really need. The other thing, of course, is publicising business analysis through writing. Now, I know Adrian writes a regular blog. I'm involved with a regular blog. I'm sure a lot of you are as well, just constantly pointing out how important business analysis is. But it's a long road, I think, and for everybody to get at that advisory level in their organisation is going to take some time and a concerted effort.
Absolutely, absolutely. And it's interesting, we've actually got a few questions that came in about business analysis and recognition. Ross asked a question, and Karen was asking about tips to sell ourselves better. So it's a common theme, and I think you sort of addressed that with your answer there, Debbie.
Actually, Adrian, can I just put another point in there?
Of course.
If you don't mind? But I think the other thing that that sometimes we can do as individuals, or business analysts can do as individuals, is to find a way of getting, I don't know, a bit of publicity in their organisation. So, for example, two of the very first people to get the Expert BA award worked for Lloyds Banking Group. And the fact that they got those Expert BA awards, and they were in the very first group of people doing it, actually got them a lot of publicity and recognition and people asking their advice. And so sometimes we need to make ourselves known in some way. And that's quite a good way to do it, is by going for things like awards or, you know, different types of qualifications like that, or really sort of stretching ourselves. So that's another thought.
Absolutely, and on that note as well, speaking at conferences like the Business Analysis Conference Europe is always a great way to showcase expertise, but it's also a great good news story back at the ranch sort of thing, because it shows that there's you know, there's interest in what we're doing. Okay, our next question comes from Andrew, and Andrew observes that solutionizing or solutioneering can be bad, but business people are not always good at thinking abstractly. Providing some solution context can often help the business people to define what they need. Would you agree?
I think so, because I think I know exactly what he means. It's interesting, actually, because I think you can look at things at different levels, and you can look at solutions, and I'm doing finger quotes here, at different levels, because if you think of something like, I don't know, a business use case diagram, say, I really like business use case diagrams because they allow me to show a scope that sort of says there's a solution in here. And so it gives a sort of a boundary, it says who's going to interact with it and what sorts of services we need to have delivered. But what it doesn't do is go down into the absolute detail of how those services are delivered, and yet it gives enough to give a hook to the business people to actually think about what it is they really want. And this is a technique, you know, I'm sure we've all used a lot, and I've certainly used it a lot in things like workshops, where it just enables you to start a really good discussion and conversation about things, and it allows you to explore, well, okay, this is the solution in terms of its scope. Now let's think about how that particular feature might be developed, and we can look at options for that. And I think that then is a great conversation. What I find awkward in a situation is where I'm told from day one, you know, we've purchased this package, or we've decided it's going to do this in a very, very specific detail, when actually we haven't really thought about it at a business level. So I think you can almost talk about business level solutions, if you like, and then the more sort of actual how detailed level solutions, and that's where I think there's more of a problem.
Excellent, thank you. Okay, our next question comes from Becky, and Becky asks, what is the overlap between business analyst and business architect?
Is that the same, Becky? Because if it is, it's another great question. Business architect. What is a business architect responsible for? Well, they're responsible for the artifacts that describe the business blueprints, if you like, that actually set out the business architecture. And they're responsible for making sure that changes align with them. So, in a way, I have always thought, well, to my mind, that's a part of business analysis, really, because business analysis, if it's looking at, okay, what needs to happen here, what problem are we trying to address, what might we do to improve it, what that means is that that business analyst then has to say, okay, if we're looking at this holistically, then we may need to think about process change. And if we're thinking about process change, we can't just do it by quickly going into swim lane diagram. We have to take a higher level look at it, looking at things like the value streams, to actually say, well, how does this align? If we're looking at people change, we might need to look at, well, okay, at a higher level, you know, what are the people capability needs that we have here, and what we're saying, how does that align with it, how might that fit with our capability requirements and maybe our available capability. If we think about things like the organizational structure, we might look at changing that in a particular situation, because it could be that part of the problem is that information is being passed around far too much, and as well as streamlining the process, we've also got to look at tightening up the organization structure, or maybe in some cases even adopting a different structure. And that has to align with how the organization is described in terms of its structure and its overall architecture. So in a way, they're two sides of the same coin to me. And I think sometimes business architects who I've met who have come into business architecture without being business analysts don't always understand how analysis is needed to actually get you to really understanding and developing these artifacts and working with them to make sure any proposed changes are aligned. But I think where you've got business architects who have come through the business analysis route, in a sense, they're developing on the skill set that they've already got, and it is that sort of flip side of the coin, if you like. So whether it overlaps or whether it more knits together neatly is how I think about it, because, you know, if we're looking at what might we recommend for change? We have to take an architectural view because we think holistically, and we know that we can't just change one element without having a coherent whole, and we know we have to align that with the architecture of the organisation. So I think it fits together really, really nicely. And in terms of role, I think if you're a business architect, you need to do analysis. And I think if you're a business analyst working at a particular level and a particular type of situation, you need to understand business architecture.
Excellent, excellent. So the two roles dovetailing together and two sides of the same coin.
To me.
Yes, yes.
Very much so.
Absolutely. Okay, our next question comes from Elwin. And Elwin's referring to the conversation we had about subject matter expertise, and is observing that sometimes for particular business analyst roles, for particular organizations, they require a certain number of years experience. So if you apply to a financial services organization, they might say 10 years of financial services experience required or whatever. And his question is, what advice would you give to a BA, for example, with many years of finance or reporting experience, wanting to move across to a different domain? So, for example, retail, digital, or online?
I think it's very difficult, actually, because my perception is that a lot of organisations, particularly in some of the domains you've mentioned, they do require experience. And so getting that experience can be very difficult. People who have done it, or the people I know who have done it, have either gone in maybe in a slightly different role and then moved into the business analysis role once they've gained some of the domain knowledge and experience, or they've worked on a contracting or external consultant basis and gone in as part of a team. So I think to be honest with you, it will depend on the organisation, but it is a difficult bridge, or gap to bridge rather, because in a lot of these organisations, the work does require a certain degree of that type of knowledge, and unless you can find an alternative way in to gain that domain knowledge, you may never ever achieve it, to be honest with you. But it does depend where you want to go, because I think in different organisations and in different sectors, there are opportunities. But as I said, the people that I seem to find who've done it have tended to go in through a slightly different route, maybe as a contractor, maybe as working for a consultancy firm for a while and going in that way, and then gaining their domain experience. I mean, obviously, the other thing you can do is to maybe look at doing some studying, or even you can do qualifications in all sorts of different areas, which could help. But I'm not sure where domain experience is actually required that that would be always accepted. So I think it's a difficult one, and I think it varies from organisation to organisation, but I think there are certain sectors that really are quite specific about it, and you would have to find an alternative way in.
Okay, excellent, thank you. Okay, we've got a sort of theme emerging with a few questions that have been raised, so I'll sort of combine and paraphrase a few questions. The theme is sort of broadly around agile and business analysis, and I'll pick up a question from Karen. And Karen says, I thought you were going to say that the third wave was taking a generic role across the whole project in line with new agile approaches, with the BA title being lost and new titles like proxy product owners. What are your thoughts on this? And just to also bring in Craig's question, Craig asks a more general question, which is how does the BA fit into agile delivery? So what are your thoughts on those two, Debbie?
Okay. I think, and I think I've said this at the conference, so apologies if anybody's heard me say it before, I think business analysis is the most agile of roles. And the reason I say that is because it is the role that is able to look at what needs to be achieved and determine how it can be done. When I have worked on, well, to be honest, projects for a very, very long time, I have never been known as somebody who follows a method or a particular approach blindly. I always believe in looking at, what we're trying to achieve and then working out the most effective way of getting there. And so I think business analysis has this built-in agility. I think in terms of agile software development, the word that is key to me in what we do is analysis. And I've worked on projects where, in some sense, because it is an agile development, the need for analysis has been downplayed. Personally, I think that's very risky. In some projects it will work, but I do think it's risky because there are some situations where you can sit, a developer with an end user who knows their job really well, but you're not going to get underneath some of the factors you need to understand if you're going to really come out with something successful. So I think that in agile software development, you need an analysis role. There was one project I worked on probably about 3 or 4 years ago now, where the subject matter domain expert user was all wrapped up into one person, if you like, and we had the development team. And when they were talking about, even what the business needs were out of the particular piece of software, it was very obvious that there was a gap. And because I was involved in the team, I was able to, help that gap and make sure that, both understood each other. We're back to the translating role here, but also looked at things like impact analysis of a particular suggestion and really questioning sometimes whether or not that was a good idea, and pointing out the implications and things like that. And so, I sort of feel that role is really needed. Okay, so I think business analysis is very, very much an agility role. I think in agile software development, analysis is needed, and if it isn't done, I think there's a high risk being taken. But to me, what the third wave is about is completely beyond that, because the third wave is actually helping organizations to invest in changes that are going to deliver value. And sometimes those changes are not going to involve software at all. And sometimes, if they are going to involve software, it may be we purchase a package. And so that's why I think the third wave sits at that higher level, because I'm all about delivery of value, however that value is best delivered. And to me, you don't get any more agile than that in business, if I'm absolutely honest. So I think it's all about different roles in different situations. But if the third wave is really moving somewhere, it's got to be beyond agile software development, because it's got to take that broader cross-organizational view.
Excellent, thank you, Debbie. Okay, we've still got questions coming in. Apologies, I know we won't get a chance to answer all the questions that have come in. We've probably got time just for one final question, and our final question comes from Ross, who asks, how does the role of the lead business analyst fit into the third wave, and what's the interaction with the PM?
Okay, well, the lead business analyst really depends on your organization, to be honest with you, because some organizations will have a lead business analyst at a sort of a team lead level. So if they're, putting requirements documentation together, that person will lead that team. But other organizations, the lead BA could be a very senior level. And in fact, 2 of the BAs who I mentioned earlier, who are very much at this advisory level and have done the Expert BA award and all this sort of thing, their job title is Senior Lead BA. So, it sort of depends on the organisation and how they perceive that role, which often depends on the size of practice and also the level of authority that the organisation will devolve to the individuals. The link with project management is a very interesting one because project managers have a very, very clear definition of role and definition of skills and tools and techniques as well. In some ways much more clear than us. But to my mind, the fact that a project manager has a very clearly defined role around planning, estimating, resource allocation, all those great things in order to achieve the project objectives. I think business analysts at different levels may be involved in supporting the achievement of the project objectives, but equally, if they're pre-project or even more so at the advisory third wave level, their focus is on achieving business objectives. And so I think the project manager is focused on project objectives and delivery within the constraints, and I think business analysts can be involved within that, but also, as explored in the second and third waves, they can be involved at a pre-project level or at a higher, more portfolio-based level, looking at delivery of what the business objectives are and what the business is trying to achieve.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Debbie, for answering all those questions. We will have to time out there, I'm afraid. We've still got questions coming in, so I mean, thank you very much, Debbie, for joining us. I can see that a number of people are sort of expressing their thanks for the webinar as well. So I think it's I think people have really enjoyed hearing the ideas that you've presented. Just as a reminder to anyone on the call who does want to keep the conversation going, there is an IIBA UK LinkedIn group and indeed an AssistKD LinkedIn group. So if you didn't have your question answered during the webinar live today, you could perhaps post it in one of the LinkedIn groups and hear responses from other BAs. Debbie, could you just move us to the next slide, if that's okay? Brilliant. So just a couple of very quick messages from me before we close off the webinar for the evening. I hope you've enjoyed the webinar. I certainly have. I think it's really interesting to hear the various ideas that Debbie has put to us, and I've been scribbling down various notes during the webinar as well. If you have enjoyed the webinar, we would love to stay in touch with you. You're probably aware the IIBA UK chapter is run entirely by volunteers. We're all practicing business analysts or people who do BA stuff in our day job. So please do check out our website. If you've enjoyed the webinar, it's definitely worth signing up to our mailing list if you're not already on it. We're going to be running a whole bunch of webinars this year, and you'll hear about them first if you log on to the mailing list. Equally, if you haven't been to a real-world IIBA UK event, you might like to come and join us. We run events around the UK. It's a great way to network, hear new ideas, and perhaps progress towards some of those more mature third wave ideas that we've been talking about this evening. And if you really want to get involved, then there are volunteering opportunities at IIBA UK as well. And of course, you might like to join. For more information about what we do, check out the website at iibauk.org. And if you have any questions at all, please do feel free to drop me an email. All that's left for me to do now is to say a huge thank you to Debbie for presenting and sharing those ideas this evening, and a massive thank you to everyone who's dialed in. Good evening.